Hey everyone. At one point in this episode, we talk about showing empathy towards someone with a Jewish cultural background. But empathy is never a zero-sum game. It's needed for all impacted by the events occurring in these times. Please take care. It's your boy Remoy George Phillip the First.
And this is Samantha and Zessie.
This is MASKulinity.
The show that investigates the performance of masculinity in the world today. And you know we spell it with the hard K.
Okay, so last episode, I know I modeled some poor behavior.
Poor. That's a euphemism.
Okay, yeah.
But thanks.
It was bad. Sure, it was bad.
You mean like when you cut me off?
Yes.
On the Gender Equity podcast?
You are correct.
When you mansplain my life back to me? We still love you, but we gotta call it out, Remoy.
Yes. But isn't me like owning up to it like kind of modeling good behavior?
That's like step 1 of like 500. So let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Well, let's keep the steps going. Like I want to model some good behavior on the show, right? As we restart. And let me just start it off, okay?
Okay.
All right, let's do it. Let's do pronouns.
Oh yeah, this is great.
Okay, so mine are he, him, his, and I'm also cool with they, them.
And mine are she, her, hers.
And actually, let's keep the good behavior going. We actually have some guests with us. Jonathan Reed, welcome. And can we get your pronouns?
Sure, Jonathan Reed here. My pronouns are he and him.
And we also have Jeff Pereira.
What's going on?
Hey, Jeff, can you tell us your pronouns?
Yes. Hey, everybody. It's Jeff Pereira. Pronouns he and him.
Folks, we're off to a great start. Let's see if we can keep it going. Jonathan, pop quiz. What are we talking about on the show today?
Oh, man. All right. Today we're talking about... Today we are hearing the knowledge truth bombs being dropped by Jeff Pereira. And if that doesn't mean drop everything you're doing, pull over your car and sit and pay full attention, then I don't know what does.
We're also going to hear some incredible insight from Jonathan with his work with boys, with young men, in person. We're going to talk about Bugattis. We're going to talk about Taylor Swift. We're going to talk about swimming in cars, Lambos.
Get ready to get in the Lambo. That's coming up after the break.
Curious about next-gen men? We're a small part of a much larger movement to undefine masculinity for a brighter future. Our mission is clear: empower the next generation to use their curiosity, empathy, and courage to build a more equitable world. Join the Next Gen Men community as we learn and unlearn together. We're here to support boys and men to break free from limiting stereotypes. We're not just an organization, we're a catalyst for reimagining masculinity and fostering inclusivity. We're here to help open up possibilities for what men and boys can be. Explore the world of Next Gen Men at nextgenmen.ca and join the community to make a difference. Next Gen Men, shaping tomorrow's leaders one step at a time. Join us and help undefine masculinity and empower the next generation of men to lead with empathy and courage.
Welcome back. So I think, Samantha, this is the bit where you educate me on what's going on in the world, right?
Yeah, and I just want the folks to know, everybody listening right now, this is not a bit, okay? Because I can't even count now, just in the past few weeks.
I wish it was.
How many times I've said a name or talked about something that's happened in the world, and like Remoy just stares at me with a blank stare, just a blank face.
My ignorance bubble, yeah, it's the dopest thing in the world. But I do want to say, honestly and respectfully, like I'm not totally in the lurch. Very aware of the capital big news that's happening in the world. I know what's going on in Israel, Palestine, what's still happening in Ukraine. News of that scale and sadness, I'm definitely informed about.
Well, I'd hope so. But there's so much that hasn't hit your radar, so it'll be fun to see your eyes light up or cast down as I run you through some of the other news that's happening today. And actually, we have 2 guests with us on this trip. So first off, we have Jonathan Reed, who actually works for our presenting sponsor, Next Gen Men. Jonathan, hello.
Check. Glad to be here.
Hey, so why don't you tell us a little bit more about all, and I do mean all because it is so much of the work that you do.
Well, my like zinger catchphrase is I usually say I'm youth program manager at Next Gen Men, which means that I design and deliver programs, professional development, and resources related to engaging boys on topics like mental health, healthy relationships, and gender equality. That's the pitch. But yeah, I work a lot with young people. I've got a lot of passion for supporting boys' well-being and challenging gender-based violence. And I'm also privileged to work with a lot of really smart, passionate, and committed educators.
Well, thank you for joining us. Yeah. And we also have Jeff Pereira. So you're joining us after a connection that we made on Twitter X, which is what I'm calling it now. So will you let the people know who you are and what you do, please?
Thank you for having me once again. So my name is Jeff Pereira and based out of Toronto, Canada. Very, very thankful to have been doing work since 2008 around talking to men and young men and boys about helpful versus harmful ideas of manhood. Also create a site called Higher and Learning where you can see some of my videos, written pieces, short videos, and content around these conversations and how men can be the lesson in action and examples, models of possibility towards futures without violence and gender equity and lots of good stuff.
Well, folks, we're going to get into the news cycle. You down to get into it with us?
Let's go.
Let's go. That's what I like to hear. Samantha, that's the green light. Hit me with the stories, baby.
All right. Well, I mean, Remoy, so you're a writer, right?
I'm not a writer. I'm a person who has written a few things. Yeah, sure, whatever.
Okay. All right. So I know you've studied writing. You like to write things. You know, you read a whole lot.
Big avid reader here. Yes, I am a reader.
Okay, cool. So now, have you ever written a scathing poem or song about an ex?
I definitely had an emo side. And, as like a writer boy in the English department, you definitely like write what you know, which I knew. A lot of breakups back in the day. So I was a sad boy, but it wasn't like a sad, angry boy. So no scathing, I guess. Is what
Oh, okay. Okay. That's a good clarification. Okay. So I'm not a Taylor Swift fan, but a lot of people are.
Wow, okay. Look, I love TSwift country music. I haven't kept up in the last 20 years, but whatever she's doing is amazing.
Okay, well, she actually just added another dude to the roster of potential muses for breakup songs in Travis Kelce. So, Jonathan and Jeff, you're both Canadian. Do you know, or did you know before last week, who Travis Kelce was?
I knew of him. I'm not a big fan of football. I'm actually a baseball guy. I know I'm supposed to be a hockey guy, right? Canada, eh? But I knew of him because I followed the sports media. So I knew of him.
I had never heard of him at all.
All right, so the reason why I'm actually bringing this up is that it upset a lot of right-wing dudes that he and Taylor Swift are now dating, right? So, Remoy, you know who Travis Kelce is. Why don't you take a guess why?
This really kind of confuses me because it's like football, which appeals, at least in America, to typically everybody, most people, especially right-wing person. So I have no idea why, actually.
I was baffled as well. So here's the reason. So apparently Travis Kelce going out with a known feminist has ruffled some feathers because she's adding to the loneliness of men.
What? Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So why do we think that is? Yep.
I don't. I would toss this to Jeff or Jonathan. I'm not really sure how to guess on this one.
Any guesses here?
Wow.
I'm baffled. I have nothing.
Yeah.
Like I'm not trying to like ghost you with my response. I'm just like, I can't put those pieces together.
Right, because who would? Okay, but thankfully, shout out to Salon magazine writer Andrea Marcotte for breaking it down for us in an article for Salon. So here is a quote. The right has long quietly feared that it's men who are in real danger of being adrift without women as their anchors. Swift scares conservatives because she lives her life on her own terms, including her dating life. But their real fear is those legions of fans who feel the same way, a generation of young women who believe correctly it's better to be at home with friends and cats than married to someone who doesn't respect you. And who knows, maybe you'll get to hang with a hot football player or two in the process. So does that track for y'all? That there's a population of men, boys even, who are feeling more alone because of empowered women.
Threatened, right? Like Taylor, I think she's at the point now where she could buy an NFL team. Like that kind of status, right? Like this whole thing about what do I bring to the table? Like she's there to watch her little pet boyfriend run around in pajamas on the field, as she's like eating,
Lord.
Yeah. Well, but you know what I mean? Like that's the perception, right? It's like, oh, okay, it doesn't matter. I gotta get more Bugattis. I gotta get a 10-pack. I gotta,
And it's like she's modeling this kind of behavior, right, too? And like for young girls out there or other people out there that can see this and then break down potential stereotypes. And maybe Jonathan or somebody else could speak to this, but like, I don't know the effect on boys, but I could definitely see the effect on like men my age or a little bit younger in their 30s and 40s who kind of have this idea of what their life should be and these narratives of these expectations of how the world's supposed to be. And the men, still we have the narratives of kind of being the breadwinner and like leading, and it totally messes with your expectations and or these promises that you're promised. And I can only imagine how disorienting or lonely that could feel at times.
I think what comes to mind for me is, this is like a slightly different topic, like the uncertainty, the like reluctance of getting things wrong in terms of like consent, communication, crossing boundaries. I feel like there's a lot of young men who are trying to figure out, how do you communicate? How are you supposed to do it? And there's a lot of conflicting narratives about like, what are you supposed to be a man, right? But also, who are you supposed to be in 2023?
But what's interesting is like, I think that we're seeing conversations online of this idea of the high value man. Here are the things you need to be, and that I think starts at a fairly early age where they haven't been on a date, but they're kind of starting to formulate, okay, this is what dating is about, and this is how you get a girl, or why a girl would want to be with you. They're on the cusp of that becoming my thing. Maybe if they're watching football with dad, and maybe dad or their big brother starts to kind of pop in certain references when the camera keeps showing Taylor Swift during the football game, in the stands watching her boyfriend.
I think, my next question for y'all is like, what is it about the performance of masculinity that requires cishet men to have or possess a woman to be a man, right? Like, why does that boost your status?
I mean, it's the chicken or egg, or at least how I'm kind of understanding it. And like, Jeff's kind of alluded to it. The social messaging is out there, and the social messaging is hitting us kids at a very young age. And the messaging is coming from so many variable spaces. Yes, in the public sphere between movies and TV and music, but then it's informed through family traditions and the society that the family's in. And so there's just all this messaging that's kind of driving these very streamlined, specific messages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I think seeing Travis with Taylor Swift feels like, oh man, like Taylor's like the antichrist to all of that, right? It's like she's an embodiment of like self-made, I don't need a man. Like, she kind of counters this whole idea of what my value, my worth is. Because here's a wealthy man, a athlete, so very able-bodied, alpha male, playing an alpha male sport, and he's second fiddle. So it ruptures the whole narrative.
Can I turn the question on you, Samantha? Like, from the other side of the experience, like, what is your answer?
Well, not that I'm a Taylor Swift fan specifically, but from the things that I've heard, she kind of gives voice to being able to talk about that distress, talk about that, in some cases, like heartbreak, maybe not abuse necessarily, but definitely like a gateway to be able to speak about that. That maybe usually, women are just kind of expected to just take because it's just kind of par for the course of being in a relationship with a man because, quote unquote, boys will be boys.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I'm interested to see where this second story will go. We just tackled some sports, but you started with poetry? I don't know. Let's go with the second one. What's the second story about?
All right. So, actually, keeping with the same vibe, Remoy, we've established that you're part of the literati.
Okay.
So, what do you remember about the book Fahrenheit 451?
Okay, so my literary cabal here will judge me, but I've actually never read Fahrenheit 451. But I do remember it was like banned and burned or something of that nature. Yes, it was very controversial.
Yeah, so book burning, right? And so while the book burning hasn't actually happened recently, there were some lawmakers, such as now retired Tennessee lawmaker Jerry Sexton, who suggested that books that were deemed inappropriate should be burned if they touted critical race theory.
Yeah, okay, so I'm aware of critical race theory, but actually, what does it mean? Can you spell it out for me?
Yeah, so I'll let the coiner of the phrase, Kimberly Crenshaw, who also coined intersectionality, talk more about it. So here she is speaking on MSNBC back in 2021.
critical race theory is not so much a thing. It's a way of looking at a thing. It's a way of looking at why, after so many decades, centuries actually, since the emancipation, we have patterns of inequality that are enduring. They are stubborn. And the point of critical race theory originally was to think and talk about how law contributed to the subordinate status of African Americans, of indigenous people, and of an entire group of people who were coming to our shores from Asia. And the point was, quite frankly, to understand the problem in order to intervene in it. So we put about the task of understanding how law wasn't just the neutral referee. Law wasn't always on our side. In fact, law was less on our side than for on our side. And we wanted to tell these stories in order to do better with the promises that are embedded in the Constitution.
Well, that was incredibly well said. And you're probably getting it, how it's pretty damn dangerous for 49 states to take on anti-CRT measures and bar access to history that includes factual information about racist systemic decisions.
Absolutely. Totally discriminatory in every which way. It's not good to ban these books, specifically books that kind of put an aperture around this kind of subject matter, look at the law, or look at our history in that way. But what exactly does that have to do with the performance of masculinity?
I'm glad you asked. So there are a few things. First, we know from talking with Dr. William Liu in season 2 that in the history of this country, race and gender are inextricably linked. The same thing might be said of Canada in some ways. And so in particular, how masculinities can be ranked according to race based on white supremacist ideals. So for me, banning information that deconstructs that line of thinking really leaves many young men and boys susceptible to internalizing harmful and stereotypical messages, what it means for them to be a boy or a man that looks like them specifically. And I feel like this is in line with a big theme of your work, Jeff, actually, which is unlearning.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. The way I describe the journey into manhood, describe it as a ladder. Men are encouraged to climb. Like, this idea of manhood is being tough, strong, having all the answers, being the solution, not the problem. Anything less than that is soft and weak and feminine. So we devalue women's voices, bodies, lives, women and gender diverse folks, right? So this construct has us trying to climb this ladder to reach this impossible, unattainable idea of being a man. You know, where are you on that ladder if you are an indigenous young man, right? If you are a black man, if you are a man of color, if you're a person with disabilities, and all those intersections of all that. We have so many right-wing, radicalized far-right voices saying, oh, this critical race theory, they're just trying to divide us based on race. So all that seems and sounds a lot more inviting to men of color, young men of color, unfortunately. It's an easier path, an easier way it's something that feels easier to digest, you know, versus kind of looking at the layers of oppression and understanding how I'm implicated in it and also oppressed by it. It's just, and it's heartbreaking to see more folks kind of lean into that, who are, you know, in particular young men of color, because it tastes good, it feels good, it helps me climb that ladder really quick.
I'm going to add another piece to this. Like, another thing about this is that many of the books deemed to be inappropriate material actually also include texts related to LGBTQ and gender issues, which is where we come in, right? A lot of these texts make critical points about how systemic marginalization has been designed along intersections of race, gender, and sexuality. There's a list of 850 books. Yes, like 850 provided by Representative from Texas, Matt Krause, who was asking superintendents to take them off the shelves, right? So banning this wide variety of books has had a sad multi-pronged effect. And I'm thinking how, yes, it makes minority children feel less represented, but also feel alone, right? And so Remoy, I'm actually imagining that, you know, you might have experienced this.
Yeah, I didn't really think about it in this lens, but yeah, I mean, as a kid, I grew up in Texas as a South Asian American immigrant kid, and around my world is predominantly, if not majority, white, Judeo-Christian, very traditional conservative values. And because of like just trying to like survive the antagonism of racism and classism. It just was safer to assimilate. And it's even like I would have never even considered indoctrination. But actually, yeah, like I'm very honest about the fact that I was conservative growing up and had some really backwards, at least as I see them now, ideals about the world and how people lived, and very anti-feminist, but that was my normal. And that's just the world that was around me. And for whatever many reasons, touching upon what Jeff just talked about, I wholeheartedly was into that. But similarly, the reason that it made me more susceptible to that, because there was less representation on the TVs, because that's all that pretty much raised me, or within the books or the stories around me that showed me as a whole person and showed my person reflected back at me and taught me it was okay to be me. On the contrary, it told me it othered me in many ways and showed me that this one specific identity, predominantly whiteness is what I'm referring to, was the norm. And so without diversity being readily available, and in this case that we're talking about restricted, I'm assuming it still has the same effects.
Basically, yeah. So it puts guardrails on education, like all the kids in the classroom, but boys in this context specifically don't really get a chance to fully learn and think about different experiences, right? Gender expressions, sexual orientations, how there's a history of discriminatory politics embedded in the foundation of, I'll say, North America. Right. And it makes a lot of kids feel alone and lost in who they are and what they see playing out. And so actually, Jonathan, you work with boys. Is this something that you've seen in your Next Gen Men work?
Well, what I'm thinking about, there's this really interesting intersection of books, race, sexuality and gender, and masculinity. Those things collide in a really interesting way. And what I'm remembering is a couple of years ago, I, in this like joyful spirit, wrote a compilation of books that reflected gay, trans, and sort of queer masculinities for Pride Month. So I wrote this blog post. It's just a joyful, afternoon. And a little bit later, I stumbled across a list of banned books in North America and found out that not one, not most, but every single one of those books had been banned in different parts of the United States. And so when I went through that list and went looking at the books that had been banned, obviously there's a huge diversity among them, but I kept seeing a pattern of masculinity, and in particular, boys of color who are embracing and exploring queer masculinities. Though that was like a pattern that I was seeing. And so I kind of, I sat with that for a bit. I did some reading about that. And one of the researchers that I came across is Ken Corbett. He focuses particularly on feminine masculinities among young people. And he had this interesting analysis that kind of stuck with me. He said something like feminine boys are often seen as trauma. And he said something like, trauma for whom? The boy or for the normative order? And that's kind of how I feel about the critical race theory stuff as well, is that, the position is this is dangerous, right? We can't tolerate this concept, this rhetoric, this literature within our education system. What comes to mind for me is it's dangerous, but it's dangerous for who, right? Dangerous for our educators, for our children, or dangerous for the status quo?
Oh, can I just ask this question? And Jonathan, especially, like, what is the work being done that's like trying to counter this? And like,
yeah, it's tough. I mean, I remember listening to a different podcast episode about book bannings and the work being done by librarians, by educators, and by young people themselves to advocate. And in that context is to advocate for the representation of 2S LGBTQ youth. But there's part of me that's not wanting my answer to further polarization. It's really easy to say I'm right, they're wrong. And potentially the needed, hopeful, optimistic answer is to name, some of those educators who are standing up, who are doing tough things, having important conversations, or putting themselves on the line to say, these resources are important. That anti-trans legislation is not okay. But I guess I want to dial back from that a little bit, at least in where my heart is today, and say that some of the really important work is the people crossing those boundaries, crossing those lines, having open, honest, and thoughtful conversations with people with whom they disagree, whether those are family members, colleagues, politicians, if that's happening at all, and just try to be able to hold a multitude of ideas and conflicting pieces so that we may continue to discuss and not just try to stomp each other out.
I think that was very well articulated. When you talk about coming together in the middle, right, to have these conversations, like what sort of spaces are available to make that happen? Like, how do people begin to have that dialogue, if they don't have, like a next gen men to go to, or, like a specific classroom or an activist that's like in their town having that conversation?
I'm still thinking. You got anything, Jeff?
Yeah, I'll say right to get it going. Like I think that is one of the critical pieces right now. We've gone through this era of surfacing. So what happened is truth started to surface, like Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, and Time's Up, the realities for Indigenous people around the world. And what then surfaced was our reaction to it. Some of us leaned in and were like, "Oh my God, I had no idea. Tell me more." Or what can we do? What can I do? And then other people, what surfaced was their reaction of defensiveness, freeze, flight, fear, etc. And then the third thing that surfaced is what we're doing about it. And that's kind of the era that we're in right now. If you want to think of the social change maker, social justice, whatever phrase or label you want to use, that movement, it's a vehicle that's going down the road and we're all parts of that vehicle. And our vehicle is made of all these different parts and it's still coming together as it drives. So all four of us are each playing maybe a similar role or a different role. I think there's a lot of infighting because we kind of go, you need to be more like a brake pad. Oh, but you need to be a steering wheel. There's times where we put on our advocacy hat and there's times where we put on our education hat, right? And advocacy is like, this is an issue. This is a problem. You need to see it right now. This has to stop. And that's valuable and critical. But it's not the only role in the vehicle. There has to be the other piece, which is the education piece, which is something that Jonathan, I try to do, which is meeting people halfway, trying to create a halfway point. How do we create middle ground for people to have a light bulb moment before they reach the point of no return? We need to really critically, lovingly, but critically re-examine what we do and how we do it and what pieces are missing or how we work together to make the vehicle go down the road. The other side is driving a fresh Lambo.
Well, speaking of the vehicle going down the road, we started with TSwift. We had some book bannings in there. I feel very much more informed. And now we're in the Lambo. And you know what they say? They say there ain't room for four in the Lambo. You know what I mean?
Who said that? Do they say that, Remoy? No.
Remoy just said that. Anyways, after the break, Samantha will have a longer discussion with our guests about the effects of loneliness in boys. That's coming up.
Calling all bookworms and changemakers, get ready to dive into Book Club. That's BOOK, Beyond Our Own Knowledge for those that don't know. Explore a world of captivating reads that explore diversity, foster empathy, and spark personal and professional growth. Join a vibrant community of readers with over 650 male leaders to date. Engage in thought-provoking discussions and expand your horizons. It's not just a book club, it's a journey towards a more inclusive future. Visit bookclubformen.com today and start your reading adventure with purpose. Book Club, where pages turn to progress and readership to leadership. Join the club and let's read for change.
So welcome back. We're here with Jeff Pereira from Higher Unlearning and Jonathan Reed from our Next Gen Men crew. So it's awesome to have friends of the show on. Thanks you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So yeah, I wanted to talk about how young men are being radicalized into right-leaning social and political spheres. And we're focusing on BIPOC boys and men. And so first off, some background on this. Jeff, what made you want to talk about this topic? Because we connected on Twitter and it was kind of like a serendipitous moment.
Yeah, I mean, there throughout North America, we've been seeing the rise of hatred towards trans folks, people across the beautiful kind of spectrum of what it means to be gender expansive. And what was heartbreaking is to see footage of these anti-love, pro-hate rallies, and seeing, here in Canada, in some communities, there were representation of Muslim people that were there. These movements, they're all about just destroying the other. What you don't realize when you join up and sign up with these movements is that you're next. Well, all right, who's next? You. There are people within not just Muslim, but the variety of faith and creed spaces who are accepting and embrace LGBTQ folks, obviously. But there are unique conversations to be had within all those spaces, but also within spaces where it's communities of color and, different racialized communities. And tough because that's the stereotype of us. That's what they think of us, that we beat our women and we're all homophobic and we're all transphobic. No, we're not all that way, but there are unique conversations we need to have. But that stereotype, the trauma of that stereotype, it's twofold. It holds us back, but then the stigma, it makes it hard for us to talk about.
I really hear like the space of compassion and accountability in those tough conversations, like being in the same space. Kind of to continue with that, in many ways, it feels like parents aren't really catching on to this radicalization, right? Like, it's even more demoralizing when you consider kind of our previous conversations about like the Fahrenheit 451 CRT edition, essentially. So I'm wondering, Jonathan, does this particular dynamic come up in your work with boys, this radicalization?
I have empathy for parents. Like, you have to choose your battles sometimes. All the time. And often a lot of this stuff is positioned as a joke, right? It's just a joke until, of course, it's not. Yeah. So I think even for those parents who witness, elements of radicalization, it can be hard to put your finger on it and really identify what's going on. You don't need to know the subtext of that reference. Like, you just need to make sure that you're nurturing that empathetic skill. That is a built skill. It needs practice. It needs validation, and it needs space to grow.
So how can you teach empathy to somebody who has been marginalized and victimized, not only systemically, but also socially, especially when we're talking about like POC boys, men, young people?
I think for a lot of young boys of color, there's a question in the back of their head. It's like, who has my back? Like, what about me? Again, with my ladder analogy, to climb the ladder, you need stepping stones. We reduce people to stepping stones. And I think for a lot of us, women and girls are the stepping stones on that ladder. We also do that to one another. We'll do that to each other as men and boys. Try to, through bullying and all these different things. So really, we think about identity, developing identity at the expense of others. Like, my being somebody, my being of value, my being someone that my life and my words and my body, my voice matters, doesn't have to come at the expense of others. But the whole world makes you feel like, no, that ain't true. Someone's got to lose. Someone's got to take an L. So you discard pieces of your humanity in order to climb higher, right? In order to become a man, you got to throw away pieces of your humanity. This is holding me down. The first thing you discard is your own humanity. So if you're further down that ladder as a young black man of color, you want to climb up. I got to get up. I got to get a leap above everybody, work twice as hard, etc. So what's the quickest fix to get there?
Yeah. And I would add that, like, this might be a little too intense for this podcast. I'm not sure. Like, I'm like a little hesitant to bring this in, but what's on my mind right now is some of the most extreme and angry young men that I know right now. I guess, to be blunt, like our Jewish boys who are reacting to what's happening in the Gaza Strip. For me, like, I'm thinking of like one of these guys in particular. Seems really angry. Maybe he is a little bit, but that anger is also fear. That anger is also sadness and vulnerability. Is there a bigger conversation to be had with him about the state of Israel and the history that is continuing to unfold in that part of the world? Yes, absolutely. At the same time, can I hold him and say, like, I'm witness to your pain right now, and I understand. Right? I don't know if I could say I understand, but like, I see you, and I hear what's happening in your community right now in Toronto, in Ontario, Canada, let alone what's happening elsewhere. Yes, the answer has got to be yes for the development and the future of these boys.
Like, you guys dropped like so many truth bombs, so many like snap moments. It was just like so great. One thing that you touched on is like this idea of being seen, right? And so we speaking about kind of like that earlier, what we mentioned earlier about like loneliness. There was like this article floating around about the rise of loneliness in young men that made a lot of waves. I think it was last year or in recent years. And every so often it just comes back into the public discourse. And so I'm just wondering, how does this loneliness and lack of like meaningful desired connection, and actually I'm going to pick up what you said, Jonathan, about like being seen. Like, how does that play into this radicalization?
I'll go first this time. I'm always like, I just want to hear what Jeff is one of the most brilliant people that I'm privileged to spend time with. So I'm always like, As
are you. I mean, you are too, man.
Let him take this. No, well, I'm glad you asked, Samantha, because one of the frameworks that has been really influential for me in sort of making sense of radicalization and young people is the Circle of Courage framework. And I think it is a really helpful way to understand what's the connection between loneliness and radicalization and boys. So the Circle of Courage framework is an Indigenous-based way of thinking about young people's development, and it focuses on 4 core needs. And I'll say that again, core needs. These are not like, oh, nice to have, sure, I'll take that with my cup of coffee. Like, these are the building blocks of our young people in our communities. So the first one is belonging, feeling of being in relationships where you're trusted and respected. The next one is mastery. So young people have this drive, right, to become competent, to solve problems. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the third one, which is independence, to be sort of free of adult control, to be making your own decisions. Lastly is generosity, which is a sense of worth based on positive contributions to others. I think generosity is what builds connection, really. When I look back on my life, like that's been what has connected me to others. And when I think of radicalization, I think a lot of young people, if they don't get these core boys, if boys aren't getting these core needs met, for example, in school, they're going to look elsewhere for them. And there's a good chance they can check a lot of boxes in a space that is driven by, even if it's driven by like sexist or misogynistic or racist views, there's a good chance they're going to find belonging or build mastery or feel independent. And so it's kind of understandable, but it has to be recognized that it comes at the cost of generosity, because there's no way really that you can be part of that community and still feel like you're making a positive contribution to others' lives.
Yeah, I love what you just said. And I think in the era that we're in, accelerated by the pandemic, it's this era of uncertainty. So it's kind of like these stormy waters of uncertainty, right? We're all, same storm, different boats. We're all trying to survive, stay afloat. Some of us have yachts. Some of us, are just swimming in the water. And we don't, and a lot of us as young men and boys and men don't have the emotional muscle, the emotional capacity, emotional literacy to stay afloat, So we're desperately trying to grab onto something. And that's when, harmful ideas online and in person are like this life jacket that they toss, right? But Andrew Tate stands on Bugatti Island and is like, come here, come to return to traditional solid ground ideas of manhood where men need to be the alpha males, like come back to solid ground. And it's, that man-made island is just quicksand, right? And it's an illusion that he's selling. And what we need to do is, we need to be lighthouses for young men and boys to find their way out of the stormy waters towards real solid ground.
Wow. I mean, incredible. Honestly, I just want to thank you for your brilliance, Bugattis, Lambos, and all of the houses we need. We all need to be. These analogies are on point, though. One thing you have got down is definitely the analogies, I gotta say. Yeah, such a literary episode. Shame Remoy ain't here for it. But seriously, though, thank you so much for you being here today. We're really grateful to have you two on the show. Yeah, is there any kind of like upcoming work that you guys can tell us about? Jonathan, we'll start with you. Anything coming up from NGM that you want to share? And updates from your podcast, Breaking the Boy Code?
Yeah, well, I'll quickly mention Breaking the Boy Code. So Samantha, we're working behind the scenes on the Next Gen Men Podcast Network, and Samantha and Remoy have just been this burst of energy over the last couple of months. And so they've really inspired me to pick up the pieces of the Breaking the Boy Code podcast and bring that back online. So that's the work is happening behind the scenes. So shout out to both of you for your energy and excitement and support. And there's all kinds of things I could mention, but one thing that I wish I would have mentioned over the course of this episode is a project that I've been doing basically since the pandemic started with a few different colleagues and supporters along the way. It's called Next Gen Men Boys Club. And this is based on the idea that boys are looking for spaces of belonging online. And wouldn't it be great if one of them wasn't oriented towards violence or targeting or disrespect, but could be a place where they felt supported, included, no matter what. And it's 3 years old now. And yeah, if there's any parents of masculine identifying folks or non-binary youth in sort of grades 7 to 9, we'd love to have them be part of the community. It's a fun space. It's not like a sit and talk on a podcast kind of space. It's like Minecraft trivia nights. So it's a really cool initiative that I'd love for parents, educators to hear about, to share with young people in their lives. And find the way to say, just because mom is suggesting this doesn't mean it's boring. It's driven by high school, youth. And it's I can't say enough about it. So if you want to find out more, it's at nextgenmen.ca/club.
Dope. And Jeff, what about you? Where can our listeners find you and your work and what you got going on?
Yeah, just look up higherunlearning.com, or you look up my name, Jeff Pereira. I'm on all the different, most of the platforms. The work that I do, I think of it like I come and do talks virtually or in person. And the hope is what I do is I get people, I kind of create a spark to hopefully begin a flame where it's like, we need to talk about this issue, do this work. And folks like, Jonathan, Next Gen Men, and other groups doing this work around the world, they're the ones who are kind of like on the ground, like, how do we build it and keep it going and keep the conversation going and sustain it? So yeah, Next Gen Men's work is so important. And, but if y'all want to, bring me out for a talk or whatever, that's where y'all can find me. And I'm just out here also trying to think of other ways to kind of, get men and young men thinking about these topics. So yeah.
Can I quickly say that Jeff Pereira was my first in like 2012, something like that. More than a decade ago, he came to my university as part of a White Ribbon Initiative and spoke to a group that I was part of. And so I can't speak highly enough of that moment in my life, and also the fact that he's been carrying this torch for more than a decade. It's a really important thing. I appreciate it.
And it warms my heart to see you out here doing what you're doing, and you're taking it leaps and bounds and bringing it where the conversation needs to happen. So yeah, I'm just equally just proud and in awe of what you're doing, man.
Well, that's today's episode. How does it feel?
Wait, so what you're telling me is Twitter is now called X?
Yeah, it is. Elon ruined a perfectly great name and messed up the platform altogether, and he really pisses me off because I live in the Bay Area, which is basically a Tesla parking lot. And I hate how efficient they are, and I think I'm probably going to have to get one.
But okay, wait. Yes, cutting you off, but what are tweets called now? Obviously not tweets, but do we call them X's? And get ready for it. Is that a Drake song?
Okay, that's a dumb dad joke there, Remoy. Love dad jokes, but it's
but for real, I need to know actually, is Drake still relevant? Serious question.
Interesting you bring up music because we aren't talking about music in our next episode.
Boring.
But we are talking movies.
And I'm back. All right, let's go.
Yeah, we got a fun format for it too. So we'll be pitching and selling, making a game of it.
All right. I'm intrigued.
But before all that, let's let the folks know. If you love what you heard today, you can learn more about all the work we're doing at masculinitypod.com, you know that's with a K, and nextgenmen.ca. Also, check us out on the socials at Masculinity Pod. We'll have some fun ways we'll be interacting with you guys out there, so tune in.
Don't we actually have some really cool videos and illustrations?
Remoy, you know we do. You made them.
It's kind of a shame I have to fish for compliments, you know?
All right, I guess Remoy stays authentically Remoy, but also you did a good job. But also, all right.
You got that right, I did. Until next time,
I'm Samantha and Zessie.
it's your boy Remoy George Phillip, the first.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Ciao. I'm like trying to spare my like chummy, like, oh my god, this is so cute, but like this is so great.